Hello, and welcome back to the Black Dental Reserve podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bridget White, and today we're joined by periodontist Dr. Arnold Todd McClain. Dr. McClain is a diplomate of the American Board of Periodontology, practicing in Durham and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering from North Carolina State and his Doctor of Dental Surgery from Howard University before completing his periodontics training at the University of North Carolina Adams School of Dentistry, earning his master's in science. At his perio practices in Durham and Chapel Hill, Dr. McClain performs a full range of surgeries, including recession and gummy smile corrections, as well as extractions, bone augmentations, and implants. He is also adjunct faculty and graduate periodontics at UNC Dental School. You can follow Dr. McClain on his website, gumsandimplants.org, and on Instagram at Gums and Implants. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. Perio is, it's perfect as we approach Halloween because it's one of the more gory aspects of dentistry. But it's so crucial, so important. In my pre-doc dental training at Penn, the periodontium, the gum and the bone, you can't build anything if it's not healthy. It was such the foundation. So in terms of treatment planning, I always have to look at that for the patient's best interest. So it's good to have your expertise. And I really want to jump into your background because, as gory as the gums and the bone are, your background is actually in electrical engineering. So can you talk about your undergraduate studies at NC State and what led you into dentistry?
Okay, absolutely. So interestingly enough, when I was 15 years old, I got my first cavity. And it was during the summertime, and my parents were busy, and they were like, walk down to the dentist and, get this taken care of. And so I went down there, and at the time, being in high school, um, I was very much interested in math and science. My dad had been an engineer for many, many years. Actually, he was still an engineer at that time. And so I kind of thought this is really a good field to go into. So anyway, I went to the office and I just found everything that he did so interesting, and I couldn't make the connections from taking my blood pressure to using inverted cones, burrs to prep. And after he was done prepping, I said, "Are you using a burr that's that shape so that the material will stay inside the tooth?" And he kind of looked at me funny and he said, "What do you plan on doing when you finish high school?" I said, "Well, I really like engineering." I said, "But what you do is pretty interesting." So when I said that, he turned around and he pointed on the wall, and there were 2 degrees on his wall, both from NC State. One in aerospace engineering and the other in mechanical engineering. And at that point, I asked him, I said, "Well, what do those have to do with this?" And he said, "Todd," he said, "the same courses that you take and study that talk about degradation and rocket fuel burning off are the same formulas you'll use about anesthetics and other drugs dissociating through the body and dissociation curves." So he said, whether it's dentistry or anything else, a lot of this world is about problem solving. And if you can master that with aircraft engines, you can certainly master that with teeth that expand and contract all the time. So that's kind of where it
Wow.
started.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I mean, talking about the burrs and the inverted cone and just the tapers and the undercuts and all those things that we do with regards to retention of materials. I really do see a big area where we can draw more students into the profession through the STEM training. These engineers, people that are interested in engineering traditionally, not considering how it applies to dentistry. So I hope you're sharing that with a lot of these kids in high school, in middle school even, that seem interested in science and technology, because and today, how do you feel, having been practicing for a few decades, how do you feel with dentistry becoming so technologically innovative?
I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I just, I mean, I'm trying to keep up as well. So, I mean, it's keeping me on my toes. In many regards, it's making our lives easier. Um, you know, for instance, with guided surgeries and things of that sort, or just newer technologies and agents coming along that help the healing process. Um, yeah, I can't. I mean, it's a wonderful time to be in this field. So,
Yeah, definitely. And did you always know that you wanted to specialize in perio? Like what got your interest there?
not at all. You know, at the time I got that cavity, I couldn't spell periodontics probably. So, um, so when I really got serious and looked into applying to dental school, of course I researched all the specialties, but in my mind I said, let me become the best dentist I can be and learn about everything. So I had no desire to specialize in anything when I went to dental school. Um, I just really wanted to learn about everything. But what got me interested in periodontics was just reading the textbook. We read the Grant Stern and Listgarten and ancient classic text. And at the end of every chapter, it was always the same sentences. More research is needed in this area. We don't know why this happens. This is the research that's been done, but there are still many more questions. And then there was this hint of systemic diseases being involved. And so I didn't get that in a lot of the other textbooks. It's kind of like this is the way things have been done, this is the way they're done now, and this is the way they'll be done in the foreseeable future. So it just seemed to be a field that was really evolving. And anytime there are a lot of unanswered questions, that's gonna sucker Todd McClain every time. So and I will also add this. I think many times I think studies have shown that dentists by nature are type A personalities, but I'm not. I'm a type B. And I swear out up and down most periodontists I think are type B personalities. So at least they were at Howard where I was in training. They were all happily married, they were all easygoing. You could never find them on Friday afternoon because they had gone to the beach or whatever. I'm like, this seems like a happy lot. So those were all contributing factors. So
Well, that's good. But and did you how did you find Howard? Like what was that experience? And can you contrast it with that at UNC for your residency? What were they like?
okay, absolutely. So, um, a lot of the dentists I met along the way had gone to school at Howard. So I applied to three dental schools. I applied to UNC, Iowa, and Howard. So I applied to Iowa because my dentist back home had gone to Iowa, um, and several other dentists I knew had gone to Howard. And I was living in North Carolina, so it made sense to apply to UNC. So I did not get accepted to UNC for dental school, but I got accepted to the other two. So I chose to go to Howard, and so a very warm and inviting environment, um, excellent clinical training. They could certainly be hard on you when they wanted to, just like any dental school. And
Mhm.
pretty much by the time I started residency at UNC, it was less of being a student. And I'll never forget my interview, and this really set UNC apart from the others. I remember in the interview the chair asking me, Todd, do you have any questions for me? And I said, well, what do you look for in a periodontics resident? Who is it that you want? What are you looking for? And I'll never forget Ray Williams said, Todd, he said, by the time you get in front of us, you all are all the same on paper. He said, so any of you could be here on paper. He said, I'm looking for a fellow colleague. I'm looking for somebody I can exchange ideas with. He said, hell, I'm looking for somebody I can learn from and somebody who's happy to learn from me and the rest of the folks here. And so that was very touching. So it was more like being colleagues once we were in residency at UNC.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And then as now that you're teaching, what inspired you to make sure that you would be around the future providers? What made you want to go back and teach?
I would say so. It's always this, what do they call it? See one, do one, teach one. And so, believe it or not, I think I learn more from the residents than they learn from me. So,
I
um,
see.
but sometimes it's just you may see things a different way, and then by always, I used to take even more photos clinically than I do now. But it's kind of like, it's almost sort of like practicing. Like if you're practicing baseball and, getting in the batting cage, it's kind of like the more you do and the more you see and the more reps you get, um, you just really develop an eye and a feel. And even when you're teaching somebody else, I feel like that's really keeping you on your toes. And then, I mean, you've got a university like UNC with all this research and, all this, you know, all these dollars, and you've got the best of everything there, so you can't help but learn and see some of the latest and greatest that's coming down. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Can you talk about some of the procedures that periodontists perform? Many in our audience may not know even that dentistry has various specialties, and then specifically what periodontists do. Perhaps discuss the recession correction with the pin. Is it the pinhole technique?
got,
And
gotcha.
how that has become advanced.
Okay, certainly. So most of the procedures that I perform, like you say, are recession correction. So, like if you're smiling and up top, if your gums are really high and you can see the root, or on the bottom, if your gums are really low and you can see the root, there are procedures we can do to correct that, that usually employ grafting or repositioning the gum tissue. And we kind of do that with sutures and cutting, and we can put the patients to sleep so they don't even remember having this done. And the methods used to be archaic. And I mean, I felt like when I came around, when I started residency in 1998, it seems so long ago, but there were so many changes going on in just that technique alone to make it easier on the patient, to make the procedure more predictable. And so that there's that. At the time, implants were relatively new, um, and the our chairman at the time was really instrumental in kind of helping to get all the residency programs in the U.S. on board with the residents placing implants. And I remember they were talking about just the faculty kind of having to go back to the drawing board, and the faculty having to really hunker down and learn implants because that's what was coming.
Mhm.
So titanium integrating, with the body, and now there are ceramic implants. So I mean, when I was in training, I didn't learn how to. I didn't learn on ceramic implants, but for some patients, you can best believe I better know it now. So so, I mean, that's something that I've certainly gotten my feet wet in as well. Um, then there's just good old fashioned periodontal surgery to correct disease. That's when we lose bony support around roots and teeth start to get loose. Um, a lot of periodontists are using lasers now to help do that as well, by just kind of killing off bacteria and kind of creating this really friendly environment between the root surface, the gum tissue, and the bone. So, these are all things that are employed routinely, or daily, I should say.
Wow. And then how long are surgeries? If you're going to do, um, whether you're doing like all on four, you're placing implants throughout the mouth, or you're doing this bridge augmentation surgery, like how are they hours long, 2 hours, 4 hours?
Well, I can have a short attention span, so for most of the procedures that I do, I'm really not sitting down more than like an hour to an hour and a half. But for some of these big ones, like all on fours, which I actually don't do very much of, but like full mouth implants, I mean, that can be the entire morning or the entire afternoon. Or some really large bone augmentation, that might be like 2 or 3 hours. But most of the procedures that we're doing, like single tooth or maybe 2 or 3 implants, or maybe 2 or 3 areas of recession where we're correcting that. Usually that's like between 1 and 2 hours. So that's kind of like our bread and butter. Or if we're taking out teeth and doing some grafting and getting them ready for implants, that's usually like maybe an hour or two at most. So yeah.
Can you talk about how long your perio residency was? And then perio pros is a growing area. For example, a lot of schools are having specific perio pros programs. So could you just talk about perio and pros and how they come together to restore the mouth?
Absolutely. So my residency was 3 years in length, and it's interesting that you asked that because I think prior to my applying, I think maybe just a year or two before that, maybe the residencies were 2 years in length, and I think a big part of that was exactly what you mentioned. Implants, had been integrated into periodontics, and I think perio pros combined residencies are excellent. Because inevitably, as a periodontist, at some point you're going to be intimately involved with restoring the implants. And I feel like, well, I don't feel like, I know, like the practitioners who restore implants as well as place and vice versa, they're just going to be, they're going to have a better perspective, right? So my mentality in placing implants got a lot better when I started restoring them. And so when I was in training, we worked very closely with pros. I mean, so much of it was pros driven. So when you're learning, you use a lot of guides and things like that. And generally
Mhm.
that's done by the pros department. So that interplay is critical. So I mean, I think these programs are wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. When I did my externship at Cornell Wheel Hospital, New York Presbyterian in the Upper East Side, Manhattan, and we had to do the rotation with perio, and it was definitely gory, but the detail and the before and after, the healing, watching the post-ops, follow-ups, it really is fascinating. I explain this to the patients, and of course they're always like, is it going to hurt? That's always what they ask. I say, well, your comfort is our priority, but the results are to preserve what you were born with and to make it better, is something that I think human beings appreciate, right? So especially Gen X, as Gen X, the boomers are, going out and Gen X is aging. They want to hold on to what they have.
Yes, we do.
But let's get into the numbers. We are in your tenure, we really haven't seen the percentage of Black dentists increase. We're only 3%. We're under 4% of the dental workforce. And it's understandable that many barriers are associated with economics, education, a lot of inequities and policies that exist with the wealth gap. But I wanted your insight with regards to, in terms of even specializing. For me, I was a late bloomer. I didn't even know I wanted to go into healthcare until after graduation. So after college, I did post-bac pre-med and I applied to dental school like concurrently. I don't know. I got into school and then I started, and then I was like, what is all this? What is endo? What's that? I felt so overwhelmed, but at the same time, I had to get to work because I had borrowed that extra money. A lot of changes in my family were going on, and I was anxious to start earning money. So I really didn't consider specializing as seriously. I tell my mentees now, definitely specialize, just in terms of the additional training, being able to focus on one area, and then also being having that skill set that is even more rare. So I wanted to know, what barriers did you face? How did you overcome them with regards to specializing and making that decision? Because I really um, I want to increase the percentage of Black dentists, the number of Black dentists, and I want us to also uh, increase our economic opportunities, our economic mobility, our number of practices, our abilities to help our communities. So that's why I want you to really talk about like how you overcame any challenges in becoming a periodontist.
Okay, certainly. Yes, thank you for that. Um, so I would like to say this. When I was at Howard, I had a lot of support from a lot of different places. Some of the folks looked like me, some did not. But one statement stood out. I mean, a lot of times when you think about this, there will be a lot of folks, like there will be some doubt, and there will be some folks who say, "Oh, I don't know of any black periodontist," or you know periodontics is something that a lot of the general dentists in our community are going to take care of themselves. So, maybe don't do this. But a big shout out to one of my one of my colleagues from Howard University who was a year ahead of me at dental school, Dr. Hector Cummings in Chicago. He would say, "Todd, I just apply." He said, "I would encourage you to just apply." So anyway, I said, "Well, let me just apply." And I mean, the faculty, especially both in oral surgery and periodontics at Howard, they were just very supportive in my applying to residencies. Um, and so, really, the only obstacle at that point was just really myself, just saying, "Hey, just do the best you can and apply." Um, and my parents were supportive. So, mom and dad, they were like, "You know what, son? We want to see you get all the education you can." So, um, I wound up getting accepted to 4 residencies. This was before the days of match, right?
Mhm.
Um, and UNC really made the most sense, being that I was from North Carolina. And so it was really inexpensive for me to go to residency there. So I guess the biggest barriers probably came just getting out and starting a practice, because I certainly had met folks who had gone to other programs and they had trust funds, and their parents or their grandparents stroke checks for their residencies and stroke checks for them to open the doors of their practice, and that wasn't me, right? So I mean, I had to draw up a business plan, learn about demographics, and go to the bank
Mhm.
and borrow money and that sort of thing. So yeah, so kind of, starting at a bit of a disadvantage there, but yeah. So I would say those were the challenges. And then, getting patients in the door. I mean, periodontics is still very much a referral based practice and business. I mean, some of those barriers or some of those obstacles are starting to come down with the advent of social media and things like that, and just maybe direct patient to practice marketing and that sort of thing. But I mean, it's still very much a referral based business. And believe it or not, I may come across as an extrovert, but I'm really not. So, I mean, I
Me too.
really had to put myself out there and go meet, all of these dentists and just anybody and everybody. So, I remember some of my friends and I just talking. One of my friends was saying, he said, "Todd," he said, "by the end of my first year, I had taken over 300 people out to lunch." So,
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it is. I'm an introvert too. I think people think because we talk to patients all day that we're extroverted, but that's our job, patient education. But you having the practices in both Durham and Chapel Hill, that must be an interesting dynamic. Can you talk about the demographics of both areas, and then maybe lean into the Black patient base, given that we are disproportionately suffering from periodontal disease more than any other racial group. I just wanted your insight there.
okay, and yeah, just before I get into that, to circle it back, because you mentioned that was another key reason why I went into periodontics as well, is that we are disproportionately affected by gum disease. And when I would ask my parents, I said, Mom and Dad, are there any periodontists in Charlotte who look like me?" And they're like, "No," and there never have been. So
No.
yeah. But yeah, so in terms of the demographics of the practices, I would say in Durham, um, and I mean, my assistant and I really had to fish through this to answer this, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in Durham, 60% of our patient base is Black or African American, and then the rest being, you know, everybody else. In Chapel Hill, it's a bit different. I would say a third of the patient base is Latino, a third of the patient base is Black, and a third is everybody else. So yeah,
Okay, wow. That's an interesting dynamic. I've never been I've been to North Carolina, Hilton Head as a child. We went on vacation, but I haven't been to Chapel Hill. I've never been to a basketball game at
we
Chapel
gotta
Hill.
change that. We got look. You haven't been to a basketball game.
I know. It's so funny. My son is 10 now, and he talks about the J1s and the J5s and these Jordan sneakers. And I'm trying to tell him I was alive when Michael Jordan was wearing those sneakers. But yeah, no, it must be so exciting. I mean, you are definitely, do you feel like that's a big part of the culture down there,
It is.
for you, with regards to, working at the school and then of course being a fan of the athletics?
Yes, it is. And I mean, it's so funny. I mean, it can really. I mean, a lot of times people will ask, um, why two practices? Why so close together? And I mean, as people move into this area from different parts of the country, it becomes less obvious. But maybe 10 years ago, there were folks who lived in Chapel Hill, had grown up in Chapel Hill, were born in Chapel Hill, and they said, I'm not going to Durham for anything. And vice versa. We get folks in Durham, home of Duke University. I don't want to go, I'm not going over to Chapel Hill for anything. And even right down to referral lines, some folks who had been practicing in one town or the other historically, they had kind of gotten over it. But when it came to referring their patients, I remember some of the folks in Chapel Hill. Well, gosh, if only you practiced in Chapel Hill, I could get you some more patients, you know. So
Oh, wow. Well, it's great that you've at least increased that percentage to 100%, in terms of being that Black periodontist that the patients can access. Um, have you seen more? How many Black colleagues do you have, in either towns?
okay, so I think right now, I think it's still in Durham and Chapel Hill. It's still just me. Right up the road in Raleigh, one of my mentors, Dr. Otis Washington. He's about maybe 12, 13 years my senior, went through UNC as well. Um, like I said, he's been a mentor, so probably not a week goes by where we don't talk. Um, and in North Carolina, I think maybe total there are probably like 4 or 5 of us now. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's great. And can you, tell us a little bit about yourself? I saw on your website it says something about being a farmer.
Oh,
And I said, I don't know if that's a perio joke, in terms of harvesting the gum and the bone.
it's both. So yeah. So maybe about 15 years ago, I had a chance to acquire some land in some counties north of here. And
Wow.
so, in my spare time, if I have spare time, sometimes I'll go up there and grow pumpkins and greens and things like that. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
in
That's wonderful.
those counties, they have a little less regulation on things you can do and can't do versus Orange County and Durham County. So the home
Right.
of UNC and Duke. So yeah, so that's what that is. So yeah.
Well,
But yeah,
that sounds like
so those who don't get the joke, so in dentistry, periodontists were affectionately known as gum gardeners. So that's
I do. I've never heard that term, but it makes sense.
yeah.
Um, I, I'm going to use that. Well, I guess it's a chance for you to, uh, a call for more Black dentists. What would you say to parents, to teachers, to kids who are thinking about what they want to do and overlooking dentistry or not considering it? What is your call to action for more of us to join the profession?
Well, I mean, if somebody, okay, um, I mean, the mouth is a very important place to be. And I could be wrong about this, but I mean, being proficient or strong in STEM, I think is going to be a prerequisite to be a good dentist in the future. And you hear about all of these professions being replaced or displaced by AI. And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think with the intricacies of like gum grafting and things like that, or treating gum disease, and until they come out with a pill and start manipulating genes extensively, I think I think periodontics I think is probably going to be one of the one of the last professions to be displaced by AI. I think I could be wrong. So
It's definitely,
but
yeah, it would take a lot.
yeah,
Take a lot of technology to replace the manpower of the
right,
procedure.
right,
Yeah,
yeah. Whereas
that's a good point.
yeah, and I mean when I first graduated from engineering school, I actually wrote code for IBM for about a year, right? And
Wow.
and I would say the job I was doing at that time, I mean, AI could replace that job in 5 minutes. So, um, I mean, I think that I mean, it's so hard to predict what's going to happen, but the mouth is an important place. Now, as a 15-year-old adolescent kid, I was kind of obsessed with the mouth. I mean, at 15 years old, I mean, besides eating, I mean, 15-year-olds eat a ton, right? They certainly talk a whole bunch, as you and I both know. And but I mean, as a 15-year-old boy, you start looking at these pretty girls, right? And like you start thinking about kissing and that sort of thing. So I mean, it's just, I mean, that was part of the dynamic too. So I don't know if I'm speaking to everybody, but I mean, I think it's a place where you can it's a nice way to own a practice or own a business if you like. You
Mhm.
can certainly do other things outside of that business. You may have a lot of flexibility in setting your own hours, or if you want to be your own boss. I mean, there are other professions where you can do this as well, but I mean, dentistry was kind of tailor made for that from the get go. Um, so, I mean, that's what I would say. And there are there are a lot of changes coming down the pipe just to keep it interesting. So,
Yeah. Yeah, you hit on a lot of really good points. And just to let our audience know that Dr. McClain's offices in both Durham and Chapel Hill have evening hours, weekend hours, and that is a very big aspect of the entrepreneurial part of dentistry, that we can set our own hours. There are dentists that don't, they may not be able to practice due to pregnancy or illness, but they still have an entrepreneurial um, opportunity with dentistry, teaching. But that is so cool that you did code for IBM. I have to tell my cousin that because she worked at Dell for a long time. She's an engineer, so um, that's wonderful. I really think this is, thank you so much for joining us because your background is so dynamic, and your personality, it seems very relaxing, and I'm sure your patients really appreciate that. And then on top of that, that you are the provider. I have patients who will ask me specifically if I'm sending them to a Black specialist, and they will practically demand it. Luckily, in an area like DC, Northern Virginia, there are more, but I would imagine that the greater community would like to see more providers. So we need people to get down there to Chapel Hill and Durham, Raleigh, um, and um, and start seeing patients.
thank you so much for having this podcast and having this site. It's wonderful. And I mean, I really feel like education and just getting the word out. Um, I mean, especially about gum disease and all dental diseases, really. I mean, being able to leverage social media is huge. And I feel like, I mean, that's something that I could do a better job of, but thank goodness for Dr. Bridget White for creating this. So, anytime you need me or want to have me on for anything, just let me know.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Well, we look forward to sharing your posts and seeing more of these procedures that you discussed, and also talking about the oral systemic link. You were getting into that specifically for our community. You know, the fact that diabetes, heart disease, there's so many ailments that we disproportionately suffer from, and the fact that it is linked to gum disease. And this has been proven. The information, whether it's through social media, hearing it at the 5 o'clock news, or just whispered down the lane, we need to get that information to our community. So thank you. I'm so glad that you like the site. Thank you so much for your feedback. I think that our narratives are the most powerful tool for sharing our stories and inspiring our community and keeping us connected. And just knowing how you did it and knowing that you're available. Also, I think that we look forward to the younger generation contacting us on social media. Send Dr. McClain a DM, uh, comment on his post, ask him a question. Sometimes those images might look gory, but he can provide some insight and explain what to expect in your surgery so that you can restore your smile. So, well, we'll have to get you back on here so you can talk more about the rivalry between.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great weekend, Dr. McClain, and we'll see you soon.
Have a great weekend.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.